So effectively, the end game of the Freedom Rides was to take buses through states that had heavy segregation laws, violate segregation laws, be physically attacked because they're violating those segregation laws, and then have those attacks photographed and captured to show everyone else what's going on.
Yeah.
Effectively, they're trying to bait people into beating them up.
Yeah.
And so, like, this could be its own podcast in itself. I'll go through the Cliff Notes version today. So they kind of travel south, and they get extreme resistance in Alabama. So in Birmingham, basically the Freedom Riders get beaten up. We have the bus that gets actually Molotov cocktailed and blown to pieces. And morale is very low at that point because it's like, we signed up to be beaten, but we were not expecting this degree of resistance. You have people shooting at the bus's
You're going to
tires.
get killed.
Yeah, exactly. They go to Montgomery. Who's in Montgomery?
Rosa.
And?
Is Martin there?
Yeah, Martin's still there. So Martin Luther King's pastor of a church in Montgomery.
Yeah.
And so they go to Martin Luther King's church and they're trying to rope Martin Luther King into doing the Freedom Rides.
I see.
And they're like, if we get you as the poster boy, this is going to go viral and there's going to be so much pressure on these states to desegregate. Martin Luther King says no. He was like, thanks, but no thanks. Look, you're welcome to stay here. You're welcome visitors in our church. And what happens is actually in Martin Luther King's church, an angry mob surrounds it. And Robert Kennedy, who's JFK's brother-in-law and the Attorney General. So
Yeah.
chief lawyer, not the district attorney.
Yeah.
as
Oh, okay, here we go again.
Robert Kennedy calls martial law and the army comes in and they clear out the crowd outside Martin Luther King's church. So they're getting a lot of resistance. They then go further westward and they go to other states like Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi. A lot of them end up getting jailed in Mississippi. And what happens is other people travel in, particularly uni students, to replace those who were jailed. And the Freedom Rides actually grows in number as people come in. And this is kind of getting broadcast around the world. And the international pressure is starting to grow. Because people in the UK are seeing this and they're like, this is horrendous. And other governments are now starting to put pressure on JFK to take stronger action against it. Robert Kennedy's stance the whole time has been desegregation is bad, but we don't want to put excess pressure on the states.
Sorry, segregation is bad, right?
Did I say?
Desegregation
Yes,
is bad.
segregation is bad. Yes.
Yep.
And eventually what happens is, just like with Little Rock 9, Robert Kennedy's hand gets forced. And he actually declares that basically, firstly, that segregation is illegal. But secondly, because he doesn't have power over the states, the one thing he does have power over is a federal executive body called the ICC. Not to be confused with the cricket ICC, not to be confused with the conference centre.
Okay.
Those
were the first two.
Yes. It stands for the Interstate Commerce Commission. Basically, buses that travel between states, if that makes sense. Because those buses aren't the property of any state, in any individual state,
Yeah.
they're federal property. And so on those buses, you cannot segregate at all. And because it was declared illegal by the ICC, every other kind of transport industry followed suit. So the Montgomery bus boycotts were fairly effective, and that had a pretty big flow-on effect. Kind of the hammer blow to segregation on transport was dealt when the ICC said no segregation on the buses. And the Kennedys gave an executive order from up top that the ICC can't have any people be segregated on the bus by their race or by any irrelevant metric, apart from if you get bus sick, which is very much a relevant metric, as Jake has.
Get to the front. Makes a difference.
It does.
Yeah.
And so that's where we're going to call the story for today. We will come back to it next week, where we look at I Have a Dream, where we look at the era of assassinations, where we look at the introduction of Malcolm X, and where we look at the Black Panthers.
Okay.
And this
Bit of Vietnam War stuff.
Yeah, Vietnam War stuff.
Yeah.
The 60s is where it gets really intense. So we've only just covered the start of the 60s when we looked at the Freedom Rides in 61.
Yep.
it's about to get really intense as we move towards the mid 60s, and it gets a whole lot more radical. And we have the Black Power movement, we have the Black Separatist movement, and it changes the story a lot. And this is the part of the civil rights movement that's forgotten about.
Okay.
So make
Till
sure to
then.
come back next week.
What a cliffhanger. It feels like the end of the Spider-Man movie we just watched.
Oh.
When
Is that a
say-
spoiler? I don't know.
say
Maybe.
it will be two. No, the spoiler being that it's
It adds
essentially
on a
just two
cliffhanger, I
movies in
guess.
one. Oh, sorry, it's
One movie,
it's half of a movie,
Yeah.
really.
like Fast 11, whatever. Isn't Fast 10 in
Fast 10.
in half?
Surely not.
I think it is. I think.
Okay. Past 10 and a
we're-
half. I don't
We're talking,
know.
we're talking great cinema. Fast 10 has to be in.
Have you seen?